did a woman born and raised in New Jersey end up writing, co-editing a book of oral histories called Our Appalachia? Lauren is going to explain all of that. Lauren.
I want to thank you all for I want to thank you all for coming today, and knowing that there are Sequoians residents who are taking the time to hear about a book written 42 years ago about people living in a remote part of the country and whose personal circumstances and life experiences bear very little resemblance to our own. It's very heartening to me, and thank you so much, and it gives me yet another reason to be so happy that I've moved to the Sequoias. So thank you for coming. My interest in Appalachian life, or oral history I should say, began with reading back in the late 60s or early 70s when I read a terrific book by a writer named Studs Terkel. Any of you familiar with Studs' work? Yeah. And it was called Division Street America, and it was about the people of Chicago. And he monitored them, or you might say spied on them for a long time, and just noticed a lot of different folkways that they had, and how those were in many ways said a lot about the country and about other cities as well. Hello, Fred. Thank you for coming. And from that, I started reading a lot of other oral histories and just got interested in the genre. At the time, I was a newspaper reporter in Louisville, Kentucky, and really enjoying that career. And I had married a college professor named Don Anderson. He taught photography as a fine art and was really enjoying his career at the University of Louisville. But then Don got a sabbatical, a whole year off with pay. I was very jealous and that he was going to get this opportunity to have an adventure, or just do what he wanted to do for a year. And while I worked, it really didn't set well for me. And so I began looking around. Indeed, I began writing letters, literally all over the world. I wrote to colleges and nonprofits and to cruise ships saying that we were a photographer and a journalist and we'd come cheap, that they had something interesting to do. Having no idea that we would end up going to Passes, Kentucky, which was just 64 miles away, in deep in the heart of the coal mining area of Kentucky. And let's see, where to go? Okay. And Alice Lloyd College had already been doing some oral history, and they'd been sending students to interview their families and grandparents and interesting people around the community. And they gathered a lot of student interviews, and were just looking for someone, an editor, who could just whip it into a book. And so that was my job. And Don's job was to start an Appalachian Appalachian Photographic Archives to collect old pictures of the region, and also to make pictures of the people we interviewed for the book. So I quit my job as a reporter in Louisville, and we geared up to move to Passes, which is the home of Alice Lloyd College, which sponsored this project. Our arrival boosted the town's population from 64 to 66. The start of this adventure could not have been more inauspicious. While loading our two Volkswagens, one a squareback, one dug, with everything we would need to live for a year, I fell down a long flight of stairs and landed on my butt. It hurt like hell. The pain was awful. But I couldn't bear the thought of unloading the Volkswagens and having to start all over again. So we pressed on regardless and made the drive. So we arrived at the college. Little snafu had happened and they'd forgotten to put a bed in our apartment. So we spent the first night sleeping on the floor. The next morning, my butt still hurt like hell. And so I went to the only doctor in all of Knott County. He examined me and he said, "Your tailbone is broken." I see this injury often, usually he said, it's in cheerleaders. And there's really only one way to treat it. I'll have to amputate your tailbone. This is the truth. I got out there so fast and called my father and asked him to send me one of those rubber donut pillows. He did, and it worked. I still have my tailbone. Our Appalachia begins with is a collection of oral histories, and it begins with the memories passed along, grouped together to describe a simpler time, which probably mostly would have been back in the 1800s. And it groups together some people who were quite elderly when we interviewed them and told us about what life was like when they grew up. And one of them I thought described it so interesting. She said life in the mountains was like a hand-woven fabric in which the warp was religion and the woof was politics. And to be considered an outstanding equal in a community, a person needed to be a member of the old regular Baptist primitive church. Teaching was the only paying job around at that time and totally controlled by politicians. When a man ran for office, it was usually not especially because he wanted to serve, it was because he had a daughter or niece who wanted a teaching job. And the job of righting local wrongs, there was no police force, but so it fell to a small group of people called bad men. And bad men were just acknowledged to be good with guns, good at looking out for themselves, and good at protecting their kinfolks. I learned this and much more from Berna Mae Sloan, who said she never tired of talking. She loved, most of all, correcting the misconceptions about hillbillies and hillbetsies. She also loved making quilts and claimed to have made 700 of them. Berna Mae generously taught me to make quilts. She adored her father, whose name was Kitten Eye Sloan. I didn't make up that name, it was really Kitten Eye Sloan. And she wrote a book about him that was published, and I'll put a copy in the Sequoia's library soon. She said, he lived by the Bible, but he got drunk, and he fathered 2 children out of wedlock, but he was the kindest, gentlest person I ever saw. He had a 6th grade education, and that was it. Her mother, Berna Mae's mother, died when she was 5 weeks old. Berna Mae had a sister called Sissy, who was born retarded. And once Sissy got too close to the fire, she was wearing her favorite red dress, and the flames just caught it, and she died immediately. So as you can see, it's just a pattern after hardship after hardship after hardship, and I could go on for a long, long time. Berna Mae told me, I'm a misunderstood mother. My children can't understand why I live in this house, why I don't build me a new house, why I don't get me a new couch. They can't understand I've got everything I want. I know I'm poor. I know this isn't much, but I've got more than President Nixon has. Because I'm satisfied with what I've got and he ain't. So, Knott County, Kentucky has 2 things in abundance: coal and poverty. Neither is likely to attract sophisticated medical practitioners to the area. Thus, until 1973, the county could muster only 2 overworked doctors to care for its 20,000 inhabitants. Then, 2 young sons of Appalachia, Dr. Brady Stumbo and Benny Ray Bailey, opened the East Kentucky Health Services Center in tiny Hyndman. In the years since, the clinic has become a model for 250 other rural health centers around the country. Stumbo, 33 at the time, was a university-trained family physician. The medical director was Benny Ray Bailey, who had a doctorate in business administration from Ohio University. So they were 2 very sharp people and very dedicated to Appalachia and to make it a better place. They generally did not, they asked everybody to pay something, but never stopped providing medical care for anyone who couldn't pay for it. The big problem, health problem that was facing Kentucky then, and still does, is lung disease caused by the coal mining. But most complaints, Stumbo said, were the ones that you really see everywhere, like hypertension, cardiovascular disease. Obesity was common too. He said you can't cook anything in East Kentucky without adding 2 cups of pork fat. And my experience is that was true. Preventative medicine and education were stressed. Their use of drugs and anyway, they made a lot of very positive changes in the medical care in Eastern Kentucky. The information on your map, on the left side of your map, which contains really, I think, a lot of very positive, encouraging things that have happened and are taking place in Eastern Kentucky and Appalachia in recent years. And the ARC, Appalachian Regional Commission, is actually a federally created agency that was created to help the Appalachian region and to first study it, analyze it, and create economic opportunities. The biggest lack that the area has is developing its workforce and also the infrastructure and building the infrastructure for that. I would say it's my view that the Appalachian Regional Commission has done an excellent job of improving highways. They're just definitely gotten much better in recent years. But it has really not done what really needs to be done, and that is improve education. The education structure, it's really not education that keeps schools from being good. It's the way that Kentucky officials have decided to finance education that is just unwise, we'll say. And basically the way it's funded is through property taxes. And specifically, it goes this way, that the money for schools comes only from property taxes. And so for schools in Lexington and Louisville, which now currently have homes that are selling for $1 million plus, this isn't too bad. But in a place like Appalachia, first of all, there aren't many homes. And you remember that this town I was living in, Pippa Passes, had 64 people, so not many homes. And they're old. I mean, some of them are and they're not worth anything. And so they seldom turn hands. I mean, it can go a year or two before a house is sold in that area. And so there's no money for schools because of the way that the tax structure has been set up to fund schools. But for some reason, the powers that be in the state capitol have not really decided to clamp down on that problem. So the schools remain pretty bad and are not serving the people well. And I think that that is the basic problem that is driving all of its problems. And I'll just sit down a sec and give you a recent example. Recently, Microsoft approached the people in Hyndman, the county seat, and said Microsoft was interested in setting up a database center in their city, and this would bring 300 jobs. And so, I mean, everybody was just so excited when this happened and so happy. But, said Microsoft, what you need to do is to demonstrate that you have 300 people who are capable of processing, a gazillion bytes of data in 1 minute, which they didn't. But the powers that be were very excited at this opportunity and gathered and formed like a mini school and set up a program to train people who were interested in trying for these jobs to qualify. And so more than 300 people turned out, as I understand it, to take the class. And I think it lasted for several weeks. And then they took Microsoft's test. Not a single person passed. So the jobs didn't come. I know. Say that would be pertinent and interesting to you. Anybody have any questions so far?
Laurel, did you say you wrote your book 40 some odd years ago?
Yes. Yes.
How long ago did you leave Appalachia?
We stayed there 2 years. And Don had to go back to school because his sabbatical only lasted a year. And at the end of that year, frankly, Bill and I, there was a co-editor, Bill Weinberg, and he was the one that was really the driving force behind the concept of the book, and frankly, the anti-coal bias. And he just knew knew a great deal about the region. And so I was to, students had already done a lot of the interviews, and I was to go out and, but the students were not really skillful questioners and not skillful in getting a lot of good information from people about these things that I've been talking about the poor quality of schools and housing and bad men and so forth. And so I told Bill before taking the job, I said, I think the students have done a really good job of finding fascinating people, but they're not skillful interviews and really didn't get as much from them as I think I could and did. And so that was only part of the truth. The truth was I was itching to get out and do the interviews myself. And I just loved doing it. And my husband would go with me on the interviews and take pictures of the people that I talked to. And at the end of the year, Bill and I put this together, spent many, many hours putting it together. And Bill and I thought we had, frankly, a damn good book on our hands. And so we decided that instead of sending it to one New York publisher, we would get a bidding war going. And so we sent the manuscript to really 10 different publishers. And with great hopes, instead, the rejection slips just kept coming in like droves, just rejection after rejection. We had so many rejections that I had the worst nightmare of my life. I dreamed that we began getting letters from publishers that said, "Dear Madam, don't even think about sending your book to me. I've heard about it and I don't want to read it." I mean, that was the nightmare. And so I literally ripped up the manuscript and started all over again. With the great help, one of those editors that I had sent it to really was so kind. She took the time to write a letter and invite me to call her. And she was at the Atlantic Monthly Press, so she was, really somebody in the publishing world. But she just went over with me what she thought was the major structural flaw of the book. And mainly, she said, it needs your voice in it. I had been so kind of scared and aware that I'm a girl from Metuchen, New Jersey. What do I know really about Appalachia? So I didn't put myself in it. And she said, no, you need to be setting the scene and sort of guiding the reader. And so if you decide to read the book, there's sections in it that are all in italic. And that's me, kind of setting the scene for what you're about to read and the people that you're about to hear. And so that was enormously helpful. In the meantime, Don had been taking all of these pictures and starting this incredible Appalachian photographic archives. And he'd made just a stunning calendar. It's not like a little calendar with wire ring that you hang on the wall, but it was a handsome calendar that came in a beautiful folder and the college was selling them. Somehow, I still don't know to this day, a bunch of them landed up in the Atlanta airport. And one day, we got a letter from this head of a really good publisher in New York. And he said, this calendar is terrific. These pictures are terrific. Have you guys ever thought of doing a book? One of the best days of my life. His name was Arthur Wang. So I wrote down, "Dear Arthur, what a good idea." And he ended up publishing the book. And it was actually very exciting. He did a great job. He took a lot of care with it. The book got, thanks to, I think, in part by being published by such a good publisher, it got a lot of good reviews. And so the publisher, Helen Wang, set me on a publicity tour, and which was just great fun. It was sort of mostly in the Midwest, a little bit in the South, and so forth. And so I really enjoyed having the tables turned and being on little television shows and so forth. But the highlight of the publicity tour was being on Studs Terkel's radio program. Oh boy, that was just a great trip. Elena.
I had a question. I may have missed your initial couple of sentences. What years were you there? When did you go to do your work there for 2 years? What were the years?
I think I was in Appalachia from 74 to 75.
Because I worked in Chicago in the early 60s when we first moved to that area in 64. I was teaching for 1 year kindergarten in Chicago.
Oh.
I had a lot of kids from Appalachia. And so I'm wondering if people were, even at that point, so that's 10 years later, trying to move away.
Yes, absolutely. There was a lot of people did out-migration, and just as you say, I think they were less likely, though, to be from the very rural area that I was in, because home is so important. And I think a lot of people tended not to move because they were just so attached to home and needed that security to thrive.
Yeah, these kids were scattered, they really were. It was a very sad scene.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, begin my closing, I'll head towards closing by talking to you about a very sad scene today. And that is, I talked a little bit earlier about the Appalachian Regional Commission and how, personally, I don't think that it's done quite nearly enough to help the region. One of the things that it has not attended to is the opioid crisis. And I am very saddened. I was in research for today's talk, I was very saddened to learn that Hindman, the county seat of Knott County, is one of the big places where opioids are a huge problem. And the people are just struggling with it. Young people have no jobs. There are just no job opportunities there. Nothing for them to do. And I think they feel very, very insecure about their life prospects. Minnie Ray Bailey has been deeply impacted by the opioid war, not himself, but his son. His son is in prison in Kentucky because he worked for an opioid clinic. He was their bookkeeper, and he cooked the books to hide the dealing, and was caught. And it just really got me in my gut to learn that if this was happening in Benny Bay's family, how awful that crisis is.
Hi. So among the people that you interviewed, how did they receive being interviewed? Did they like it, or were they apprehensive? What did they think was going to happen to their interviews?
Oh, they loved it. I mean, they loved the attention. I mean, and we always had to stay for dinner. And just the people, I can't tell you, they were just so warm and welcoming, sort of like the people at the Sequoias. And but lonely. And to have some attention from somebody from the outside, and also to value what they were saying, to value their memories. And I think they like that. But I'll tell you a funny story that I talked to you about these student interviews, and then also I began doing the interviews, and I really loved the interviewing process, but hated having to transcribe the interviews. I mean, just on very, what we call today ancient equipment. And so I did what I often do when I don't want to do something. I procrastinated, and I kept doing more and more interviews, and then not transcribing them until suddenly, I thought, I gotta get to it, girl. And so I sat down, and I couldn't make out what people were saying because of the roosters. It was summertime, and everyone had roosters and chickens. I mean, a gazillion roosters and chickens. That's how they got their eggs and their protein. And they just made a tremendous noise. And of course, windows were always open, and doors were always open. And it was just impossible to transcribe many of those interviews. So I had to go back and redo them, which on the pretext, of course, of asking more questions. And but I learned a valuable lesson that I still today think is kind of funny, and that is from then on, I tried to do most of my interviews in the winter, in the cold months, when the chickens would be in their coops. Thank you, Julie. Yeah, hi.
Hi, forgive me, I could not attend the first part of this, so you answered this question already. Tell me anything that you learned about music there.
Oh, gosh.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes.
Could you comment on music in Appalachia? Music.
Oh, so glad you asked that question, thank you. Yes, I fell in love with dulcimer music. I fell so in love with dulcimer music, I tried to learn how to play it. And got a little Aunt Rhody going, but that never really got past Aunt Rhody. I just love the music. And one of the reasons I love that question is a way that Bill Weinberg, the co-editor of this, has remained in the region, and how he is dealing with this opioid crisis. Obviously, he's not a user, but he's very concerned about the young people, and he's done the most marvelous thing. I talked to him the other day, and he was saying, you know, that one of the things that he found, he thinks is a common denominator among the opioid users, is that they love music. And so he has developed a way of trying to reach young people through music. And he has started a school. He used a word, maybe some of you are familiar with it, I sure wasn't. He calls it a Lutherary school. It's a school that teaches people how to make musical instruments. They're focusing on guitars and dulcimers, but this is now employing some young people, and they have all sorts of, you know, wonderful sort of components of it, that they're only using native woods, they're not using woods that are coming from the African forest, and got a good thing going. And it in this town of Hindman, it is just thought of the one sort of shining light for the young people. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, I'd like to also mention, if you've not seen pictures of coal miners, and I think, please come up and take a look. Andy let me borrow three or four wonderful photographs by a very fine photographer of coal miners. And it's really worthwhile to go up and take a look at their faces.
Women are upside down.
No, that one's
Equal opportunity.
They're all smiling.
Yeah.
The women work the mines too.
I never saw any women working the mines, no.
Laurel, why don't you talk, you alluded to it, but why don't you talk about the influence of coal mining on this region? And the other thing is, where did the people who settled in Appalachia come from?
I think a lot of them have European backgrounds, and particularly Scotland. But beyond that, I don't know much about where they come. Do you?
They're mostly Scotch-Irish. There's a book called Hillbilly Elegy.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Very good book.
It was a bestseller in 2016.
I think it's excellent.
And it's wonderful. And a memoir by the author J.D. Vance, who escapes the poverty there and became a Yale graduate at Yale's law school. But apparently the region began to improve a bit after World War II. Many people from Kentucky went up to Ohio for jobs. They never really fully assimilated into the culture there. They were still known as hillbillies, and of course, eventually jobs began to drift away and got sent to China and elsewhere. But and the population became much more impoverished, and they're really true Trump supporters. They believe in his promise of better jobs and so on. The book is wonderful, and I recommend it. I don't know if we have it in our library here. We do? Good.
Laurel, could you touch on the effects of the strip mining in that area and they destroyed the mountains to get to the coal?
Very interesting and controversial question. I think it's terrible. And has done terrible things to the mountains that I can't imagine would be corrected in 10,000 years. Maybe it will. Let's hope it will. But Benny Ray Bailey is really a smart guy. As you know, I have a lot of respect for him. Is all for strip mining, and indeed is doing it on his own property, not he himself, but doing it in a way that frankly is very careful, and to hear him describe it, it is really tender toward the soil, that instead of they're just taking the soil off in small pieces, saving it, extracting the coal, and then putting the land back. And one of the advantages that this has, a big advantage over deep mining, is that it doesn't involve sending men and women down underground to risk their lives and their lungs. It's just a lot safer for human beings to do it that way. I can't say I'm persuaded, but I'm interested in learning more. What do you think? Do you have an opinion on strip mining?
Well, I had heard how terrible it was because they were just blasting off the top of mountains. This is before this process came about, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just, and then all of that stuff got into the rivers and polluted them. And
Absolutely. Yeah. Homes. Just, yeah. Yeah.
Regardless of the pros or cons of different kinds of mining, I think it's fairly evident that coal is a fuel of the past and has no future. So it's a waste of time, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yes.
I may have to be really corrected by those who have a better memory. My impression from the Elegy of the Hillbilly, there was a lot of hostility by the people living there, and that may not be so, but I was just, could you give a picture of seemingly very comfortable people in the sense of welcoming newcomers?
I found that the vast majority of people I dealt with to be incredibly warm and welcoming. But consider what I was doing. I was, coming to them and asking for them to talk about themselves. And I was valuing their experiences and knowledge. And so I think the warm reception had something to do with it. I really think that the problems come when Appalachian people move to cities, and then they're in a very new and different environment. They find a hard time acclimating, and then don't find, the warmth that they had at home and so forth. And I think that has been, from my observation, where most of the problem has come. What do you think? Do you have an opinion?
No.
Okay.
Are there any African Americans living in this area? And if so, what are the relations between the whites and the African Americans?
Very, very few African Americans. I think it would be quite a difficult place to live if I were African American. Or Asian.
what's that?
Yeah.
They really don't.
Mexicans?
Yes, I think anyone from another country would not a non-European country would be would have a hard time acclimating and probably have to make most of the overtures.
Rob has a question.
That is sort of what Michael said. I saw an interview once with an entire union group in this area who were all retired. There were no active miners in their group anymore, and they all had black lung disease.
It's a terrible disease. I don't know, have you ever known anyone with it?
I haven't.
Yeah, black lung, you can't breathe. I mean, every breath is hard work. It's awful. Yeah.
Laurel, do you see in the future any differently for the people of Appalachia than the past? Can you, given their culture and their, what I take to be insularity, do you see anything coming up in the future that will be any different from the past?
I truly, truly believe that if something could happen that would suddenly give the region good schools, from kindergarten or preschool, there's no preschool there, but from preschool to college, that would make a terrific difference. And a couple of generations of that, I think, could go a long way toward really transforming the area.
Do you think that the people would support a different form of education, I mean, better education? We think that better education.
I truly do, yes, yeah. I think they're smart people. They're just uneducated people. And I found the people to be, just feel they were quite right and interested in things, especially politics and music. So yes, I don't think that low IQ is a core problem at all. Yeah. But I do worry about this opioid epidemic and what it's doing perhaps to a whole generation of young people that are there. It's very, very sad. Yeah.
Way up there.
Could you comment on the indigenous peoples of Appalachia? The indigenous.
Could you explain what you mean by indigenous?
Before the European came, the indigenous, the native people of America. That's what I mean by indigenous.
Thank you. I didn't ever run across any indigenous persons in the area of Kentucky that I was living in. Do you know otherwise?
Andrew Jackson took care of that problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I believe there were Cherokees
In Western North Carolina. In Western Carolina, there are plenty of them.
They got marched.
I said in Western Carolina, there are a great many Cherokees still living there.
Can you speak to how they have been received or in?
Everybody loves them because they have all gambling considered.
All right.
Gambling.
Well, they wouldn't get along.
So this area was a very rich area in resources and so on, but the people there did not benefit from it. The Wall Street capitalists benefited from it.
Yeah. Well, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. That reminds me. Did I tell you about calling up that clinic? And I called up that medical clinic. It's just a whole thing about the amputated tailbone and how close I came. It stuck with me. And so while doing this, I found an excuse to call this Hyman medical facility. And I talked to a nurse and I said, I just had this experience 1,000 years ago and I just wonder if it's still the same. And so I told her about Dr. Grady Stumbo saying your tailbone is broken and I need to amputate. And I said, is amputation still the way that he deals with broken tailbones? And she said, hell no. He tells patients to go out and buy a rubber pillow. I think let's end on that point. You've been a fabulous audience. Thank you, Sue.